Hello and welcome back to the Spirit Lounge. I hope you guys are doing really well and all is well and good with you and your loved ones and family and friends. So today we're actually getting into the Upanisads proper. Yeah. So I know we've been waiting a long time for that, but the introduction will be useful. So we're going to jump into the first Upanishad, which is the Brhad-Aranyaka Upanisad. That's a tongue twister in itself. So we'll just bring that onto the screen. Okay, so this is the first. There's multiple chapters in this this particular Upanishad, the Brhad-Aranyaka Upanishad, and it goes into. They use a lot of metaphors. Before we jump into this, it uses a lot of metaphors. There's lots of archetypes, particularly metaphors, in this chapter. And I have a feeling that that theme continues throughout this entire text, which is very, very long. And so I'll try to explain some of this as we walk through. And as I was reading it and taking, underlining the sections that I was looking to, I thought was important, that had some meaning. It does repeat itself many, many times, a bit like some of the long chapters in the Nag Hammadi as well, the Gnostic text. So let's jump straight into this one. Okay, I'll jump straight over the Upanishads. We know what they are. There are various texts started 700 BC to 400 BC. This is important because the metaphors used here and the language used. Remember, this text still has enlightenment, or rather, enlightenment is just a revealing of information. It has a revealing of information and esoteric, mystic, spiritual wisdom. But the way it was written is indicative of when it was written. Some over nearly 3,000 years ago. So we shouldn't overlay how we think today, almost 3,000 years later, to how the people of those days who had nothing, who basically spent most of the time, these ascetics spent most of their time in forests or caves or hiding or in mountaintops, dedicating their life to spiritual practice and unveiling what they were receiving in silent meditative receipt. So this is why they use a lot of metaphors. Animals, horses, particularly in the first chapter we're going to go into. So remember, when the Gnostics were the same, but they weren't written as long ago as this. This is almost like almost 1,000 years before. And so remember when we're going through this, that this is the way that they were thinking then. If you transplanted the same person today, their visions and what they were receiving would be interpreted and presented to us in a very different manner. So this is something we need to remember as we go through this, because it can get a little bit convoluted and complex because of the metaphor and the twists and turns that it uses. You'll understand what I mean when we jump in. So the Brhad-Aranyaka is recognized as the most important of the Upanisads, or rather the extract of the spiritual Upanisads that I will put into this Upanishad. So the Upanisads are the fifth text out of all of the Vedas, and this is the most important one. It says, and so it consists of 3 sections. A Kanda is a section. It means section. And the first one is Madhu Kanda, which is a Madhu section. It teaches the basic identity of the individual and the universal self, which is where we're going. Some of it we'll touch on this first chapter. The Muni Kanda, which is a philosophical justification of the teaching, and the Khila Kanda, which deals with certain modes of worship and meditation. And they all answer to 3 stages of religious life. The sravana, which is hearing the Upanishad, the manana, which is the logical reflection, and the upapatti, which is a contemplative meditation. Okay, so we'll go straight into this. Okay, I hope you guys can see this. I'm just going to check that it's walking through. Okay, great. So the first Brahmana, which is chapter 1 of this, so we're going into chapter 1, and the first Brahmana, there's 6 in this first chapter, and it's called the world as a sacrificial horse. Now this is where they use the horse a lot to describe the world in some ways, and so we'll see. And also the sacrificial nature of when at those times there obviously were, I think part of a sacrifice was sacrificing animals, and the horse was maybe one of those things, one of those animals. The head of the sacrifice horse is the sun. The eye is the wind. The breath is the mouth. The wind is the breath. The mouth is the fire, and the ear is the body. So they basically carve this animal metaphor into various aspects of the material plane that they're experiencing. The quarters are the sides. The seasons are the limbs. The months are the joints. The seasons, the limbs, months, the joints. Days and nights are the feet. Stars are the bones. The clouds of the horse are the flesh. The food in the stomach is the sand. The rivers are the blood vessels. Liver and lungs, the mountains. The hairs and trees are the hair. The rising sun is the forepart, which is the front. The setting sun is the hind, which is the rear of the horse. The yawn, it's when it lightens the world, and when it shakes, it thunders. When it urinates, it rains. So basically what they're describing is the earth plane, the material plane, the matter plane, the experiential plane of earth itself, and the forces in the cosmic realm above us, the stars, the sun, the moon, the elements, and they've related those to what is a horse and used the horse to describe parts of the horse to describe what these are. So this is a trend throughout, I believe, we're going to experience in the Upanisads. Okay, when the horse completes a victorious circuit of the earth and returns to the capital, now this can also be described as a celestial movement of the earth around the sun, because obviously in them days they still probably maybe thought the sun revolved around the earth the other way around, but it's a movement, celestial movement of the earth. Hence the victorious circuit, which I think is talking about a celestial movement to the capital, which means back to its original state, where they first measured. He is offered as a sacrifice, and the king who performs the sacrifice assumes the title of sovereign emperor. So there's obviously some sacrifice done during each year during a cycle of the earth around the sun, or in them days they probably thought the sun moved around the earth. No, the horse sacrifice is used as a vehicle of religious truth. The idea of the sacrifice as a means to account for creation goes back to Purusha Sukta from each of the members of the primeval person. So this is from the book. So what it's saying is the horse was used as a metaphor, as a vehicle. Its sacrifice represented the cycle of creation. So when the full cycle of the celestial movement of the earth, be that round the sun or the sun around the earth, as it may have been believed then, is a return back to Purusha, which is creative force, from which all the members of primeval person, which is basically the material matter person or our material being. Okay, the Purusha Sukta, which is universe created out of the parts of the body of a single cosmic man, which is basically the metaphor was the horse. So they used the cosmic man is equivalent to the material matter horse. So they used the horse to symbolize aspects of of what they perceived as a material plane on earth and the cosmic material bodies above. When the body was offered as at the primordial sacrifice, which I believe was obviously yearly, the superphysical can be reached only when we have a firm hold of the physical. So this is talking about where they started from the spiritual journey was to understand the foundation of the material plane we were in first. So the material, to understand the physical, from the physical to understand truly the physical, what is around us, our groundedness in this physical plane, From that groundedness, we can move into the psychical, which is a supra-physical, and then the spiritual being the divine grace, Godhead movement. It's very, very similar to the Gnostics. We're talking about left to right, right to left, or left to right, the material, the psychical, and the spiritual. This movement, the material was the physical side. The psychical was a supra-physical side, and then the spiritual was when our true journey into transcendental ascent starts to occur. The thinkers of the Upanisads reached their conclusions by a study of sensible fact, which is physical matter first, of the concrete realities of the physical world. Okay, Mahiman, which means glorified, appeared in front of the horse. The glorified means light, sun, appeared. Remember, the sun was in the front, the moon was in the back. The source is the eastern sea, which is behind the horse. The source in the western sea appeared in the horse, which is the source of the... So the eastern sea appeared first, and the western sea appeared behind. Now this could be the rising and the setting sun. Becoming a steed, he carried the gods as a stallion to the Gadharvas, which is called celestial beings and dancers and singers. So in other words, it's talking about the celestial bodies, the planets above the stars, the planets that they were seeing, the light reflecting off them, the bodies that they were seeing and the movements of them as they were being observed, the transition of the earth around the sun or the sun around the earth, and the stallion being the metaphor which carried the light coming up and the light receding behind. Two vessels placed one in front and behind the horse. So during the sacrifice they would put gold and silver. Gold being the dais that is presented in the front, being the eastern sea, and the silver being at the back, being the western sea. The sea is taken by S as a supreme self. So the S there's an S apostrophe, and I believe that means supreme self in the book, or it could be the Aranyaka deity archetype, which was the universal creative power, which is an archetype or a symbol for the supreme self, which in us could be also described as Atman, as well as being the supreme self within us. So hope that all makes sense. We're going to proceed. Okay, the second Brahman. So this is slightly smaller than usual, but I hope you guys can still see this. I'll read it through. And this is the second Brahmana, was called the creation of the world. There was nothing whatsoever here in the beginning, which we've talked about. The beginning is just a void of complete creation and manifestation, all possibility, probability contained in the silent darkness of pure light. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it isn't. Pure light is information and knowing and intent and thought cascading out force of energy into intentional movement through universal law into matter as it's perceived and thought into being. So in the beginning there was nothing, there's nothing material. By death indeed was this covered. He created mind, thinking let me, which is Hiranyagarbha, which is the creative force of the supreme. Or remember, there is only the supreme, the absolute, in this case, as the Upanisads call it, the divine grace of all things. There's only that. Everything else is abstracted archetypal metaphor or archetype, deity representations of the creative one and only all. There's only one all that we need to understand is real. Everything else is human created deity, archetype and form. So Hiranyagarbha is another one of those things. It's the creative universal power, which is the Hiranyagarbha. If you look at previous videos, we go through that structure. Thinking, let me, Hiranyagarbha, have self and mind. He moved about worshipping, and water was produced. Water was called fire. All this was non-being, covered by death, who is Hiranyagarbha, creative, universal creative power. Death in this case this was non-being, so this was called, it was covered by, it wasn't of spirit, It was just matter. I mean, all matter has spirit in it, of course. Water is called fire, which is creative force. And water, as in the Gnostics, water was where everything sprung from, i.e. The womb from which all sprang. All this was non-being covered by death, who is Hiranyagarbha, which is the creative force. So the creative force drove manifestation through water, i.e. fire. By his thought, the universe was produced. Remember, by his thought, it's transcended through Hiranyagarbha, which is just an archetype. So the divine manifested everything through intention and thought. This is the beginning of all things in divine manifestation, and also in our own divine manifestation in our individual lives. Nothing we experience in life, what we manifest, it transcends out without first beginning through a thought and intention through yourself. As above, so below, the laws of the universe are the same. This is how these principles are to be understood. Okay, where were we? Okay, he thought, let me have a self, let me develop a world of conscious and unconscious objects. Animate and animate and inanimate objects and form. Water became solidified, that became the earth. On it he rested from him, thus rested and heated. His essence of brightness came forth as fire. After production of the earth, Brhad-Aranyaka, which is another creative deity, which is the creative deity, Hiranyagarbha being the creative, universal creative power, rested. He, Hiranyagarbha, universal creative power, divided himself threefold into fire, sun, and air. Also life divided threefold. Eastern direction is his head, his arms a western direction, and his tail is a southern direction. The northern direction, his sides. Sky is his back, atmosphere the belly, earth the chest, and stands firm in the waters. So it's just using Hiranyagarbha as an archetype, and again it representing aspects of physical matter, our physical world, our celestial world, as was the horse, and all other metaphors that are used in this and all of the texts are to be understood. This is how, when I mentioned, this is how things were interpreted 700 BC. This is what was available to them to help them relate to what they were receiving as esoteric spiritual awareness and knowing. And so what they're telling us is esoterically true, spiritually true. The metaphor in which they're explaining it, we would think, why are they doing it that way? Well, it's 700 BC, almost 3,000 years ago. This is what was available to them in the experience of existence so long ago. He, Hiranyagarbha, desired, let a second half, a body or form, be born of me. Brought about union of speech by mind. Seed became the year, reared him for as long as a year, set him forth, was born death, he cried, became speech. So this is talking about the horse again, just so you know, and became speech. Life is the result of previous knowledge and conduct. So you can see this moves around quite a bit. So what this is talking about, it says, let a second self, body or form be born, brought about. He brought it about. It's the union of speech by mind, so he was able to speak through mind. The seed became the year. He reared him for as long as a year, sent him forth, and was born death, spiritual. He cried and became speech, so voice was emitted, speech was formed. Life is a result of previous knowledge and conduct. This is talking about karma, which is true. That sentence is accurate. He thought, if I kill him, I shall make very little food. So he's talking about the horse. With that speech, he brought forth all this. And then it talks about the hymns of the Rig Veda, the formulas of the Ayurveda, the chants of the Samaveda, and the sacrifices of men and cattle. And he's saying that men resolved to eat, and so men ate everything, and therefore became a ditthi nature, which becomes an eater of everything. So in other words, it's just, again, another metaphorical example of how they saw things being formed, which is effectively saying it's being formed from an intention and a thought. Let there be is basically an intention from the divine essence of universal creative force and law, which uses natural law, universal law, to manifest things of creation, transformation, and destruction, and so forth. Remember, there are three deities for those as well, which is what this is discussing. He practiced austerity, which is just simplicity, and tapas, which austerity in Veda means tapas. Also, tapas is a Spanish for small amounts of food. This could also be regarded as small amounts of being simplicity, austere, amounts of little food to taste rather than big meals. Tapas is also Sanskrit for simplicity and austerity. Glow was caused by the concentration of mental energy, extended to cover the practice of austerities. Make ourselves pure metal, we have to pass through fierce fires. This is really, for me, talking about creative force for in our spiritual journey. To become pure metal, which becomes hardened here, is pure hardness, is referring to a metaphor for steadfast spiritual expansion. We have to pass through fierce fire, which is basically experiential, expansive journeys and experiences along the way. We cannot be made anew unless we become ashes. It's true, what this is discussing is saying we have to remove our ego selves. To become ashes is to remove your ego layer, the self-righteous virtuous self we surround us, we envelop ourselves with. This is our ego self that we must remove ourselves from. This is talking about become ashes, remove our ego selves and allow the spiritual self to, the true God self to emerge. God strips us of everything, absolutely does. The journey will. That we draw near to him. He desired, let this body of mine be fit for sacrifice. I'll come on sacrifice in a moment. Let me have a self body through this. It became a horse. Horse sacrifice came to be known as Asvamedha. At the end of a year, he offered it to himself. So basically, here we go, is the celestial movement. End of the year, they sacrificed the horse, gold in front, silver behind. It represented creation. It represented earth, body, and the cosmos. Therefore, it was given a sacrifice to what they deemed were the deities, the gods above. It gave up the other animals to the divinities, dedicated all the gods. Sun gives off heat, body the year, earthly fire is the arka. Now, sacrifice was a practice back then. Many cultures practice sacrifice today. It will diminish over time to there not being a sacrifice, and obviously sacrifice still occurs within the underground demonic satanic practices that people do secretly. Those we don't speak of. I don't, but I know they exist and they happen. But these are, as humanity has evolved, sacrifice is understood not to be something that should be practiced. But back then, remember the time they saw these things, the cosmic bodies above, as something of gods that they must give gratitude for, and their way of giving gratitude was to sacrifice an animal, and in some cases sacrifice people to these gods. Now, this is archaic in nature, but of course this was 700 BC, and it obviously happened not that many millennia ago either, right? So it still exists in the world today, in animals more than human, but of course we know some depraved things still are practiced. Okay, the third Brahmana, which is the superiority of breath among the bodily functions. So breath is, before we go into this, breath is prana, right? Breath is regarded, particularly in spiritual practice, as the focus point of how we channel energy into our bodies through the breath. When we move our breath into a rhythmic movement, we meditate through that rhythmic movement. We concentrate on breath, as meditation is a practice can be done, which some people follow, other people go into meditation in different ways. Breath also is a way of cascading energy. The Kundalini is expressed through the movement of breath also to release it. So breath is an important way to move energy around us, to activate chakra points, to help meditate and relax our bodies so our minds can be freed of the release of the body for the moment during meditative practice, spiritual silence, whatever it may be. The breath is a critical factor in Hindu, yogic, Vedic practice. It all talks about breath. Breath is life force. Two classes of descendants of Prajapati, Prajapati being the creative deity, are the gods and the demons. Gods were the younger, demons the older. So it's saying that the demons were created first, which is not true, by the way. Struggling with each other, in my point of view. So when I make a comment, this is my perception, this is my knowing that I've understood from the divine knowledge that comes to me. It doesn't mean you have to, any of you who listen to this have to take that as granted. I will give you my commentary. I ask you all to consider all things, but come to your own conclusions. But remember, keep your conclusions open to change. Mine are always open to change. We are expanding on an eternal, infinite journey way beyond this life, way beyond all lives we will have. It goes on eternally. We will never be the all. The all is the all. We will come to be that over an infinite eternal timeline. Okay, gods were younger, demons the elder ones. They struggled with each other for the mastery of these worlds. God said, "Come, let us overcome the demons at the sacrifice through the Udgitha." Now, Udgitha is chanting, mantra or prayer, or saying the Om sign, which is what this symbol around my neck symbolizes, is Om, which is the sound of the universe for me, or the sound of the resonance of God. And so the way that they overcome is to chant, is to pray. A prayer, also to chant through prayer. Say the Om sign in meditative practice. And that is the way to elevate the spiritual self. When you elevate the spiritual self, you overcome what's called demons, which is the dark nature of the self, the nature of energetic expression away from light and grace, which is the opposite, 180 degree opposite of those darker, more satanic, deeper, demonic nature in humanity that many in this world unfortunately have attached to. Okay, gods and the demons refer to the organs, speech and the rest. Inclined to sacred or worldly objects. So demons were inclined to sacred or worldly, so sacred being gods, demons, worldly objects. Good or evil. They become divine or demonic. This is true. So when it says gods were younger, no. Demons the older. So this is in material form. In the beginning there was only light. Everything was expressed from grace. We came, our infinite spirits were expressed from grace, but we have infinite possibility, probability and free will. Now, did we create more demonic, darker forces and deities to worship as paganism before we decided to have more deities that expressed more grace, the source of grace? Maybe we did. I don't know how old some demonic archetypes are, and more archetypes of light. I'm not sure, but this is what this may be expressing. Okay, gods and the demons. Okay, I've talked about that. Okay, here we go. Taught by the scriptures. Okay, to become gods when they shine under the influence of thoughts and actions as taught by the scriptures. So this is saying to become a god, or rather to become I don't like this way that people say humans are gods. We are gods in our own bubble. We can manifest and drive our own experience in the infinite cosmos, in the infinite all, possibility and probability, and through our free will. Through that, we can manifest everything in our lives. We control actually everything that occurs to us here and beyond here, and also our return here. We are gods within that respect, but we are not the all. We are not the universal all. We are not the creator force of all things. Because I didn't create the creator force of all things. I am a manifestation of that creative force of all things, but I have the same force of that creative force of all things within me, so that I can manifest my own universal spiritual expansion through that creative force and be the God and governor of it. Okay, become demons when they're influenced by their natural material thoughts and actions on perception. Two visible ends, so in other words, material ends, egotistic ends, power, money, desire, lust, accumulation, domination, war, name it, all manner of things. And obviously the opposite of scriptures is light directed intention and direction. Okay, distinction of life, not of beings. Beings S, which is Hiranyagarbha, or the supreme self, says that gods were less numerous and less strong than the demons. Well, this is up to interpretation, but that is not the case. Nothing has power unless we give it. Nothing comes into being and manifestation unless we worship it and give it energy and force. Sacrifice is another transference of energy. It feeds an idea, it feeds an archetype, feeds a deity. That deity becomes real in energetic form. Real. The more energy is fed to something, the thing becomes real. This is how dark astral energies are created, actually, from the very beginning. Because life, manifestation, matter, we created these things ourselves by feeding them through paganistic practices from the beginning and sacrifice of animal and human, which still goes on today. So we are responsible, remember, for all things that we experience in life, be that positive or negative. We are accountable and responsible for it. It isn't the will, or nor is it the action of our Divine Father that any of this came about. Any of this duality came about. What we shall see is something like a battle of the gods and the giants going on between them over their quarrel about reality. One trying to drag everything down out of the heaven, define reality as the same thing as the body, which is what the opposite does. Adversaries defending their position in the heights of the unseen force that true reality exists. This battle is here. This battle is within yourself, and then from outside of yourself, it's within this world. The first battle has to be within you, and then it's expressed through your own actions, words, thoughts, and intentions externally outward to others, and then teaching and guiding others to a different way, either move towards this battle to bring everything down into bodily material identification, or bring it up into the heights of the unseen. The battle is energetic. It's an unseen battle because the battle between what we call good and evil, the devil and God, whatever you want to call it, is actually an unseen one. It's an energetic one. It's a perception. It's a perceptive one. It's spiritual expansion or not one. That is where the battle always has been, always will be. It's energetic and silent. It's all in the unseen. It manifests itself out in the material. In what we experience physically is an expression of what exists, the imbalance that exists within the ethereal energetic plane in which we are in, that we've manifested ourselves. They said to speech, chant, which is the Udgitha, so be it, said speech. So the speech, enjoyment there is in speech. It's secured for the gods by chanting. So you chant, you pray, you do mantras within Hinduistic practice to communicate and bring a divine force. The demons knew by this chanter they will overcome us. So by spiritual practice you overcome the darker tendencies of being, of all possibility and probability, which is a stream that everything exists in. Rushed upon it and pieced it with evil. Then they said to the life breath, chant. So be it, said life breath, and chanted for them. Secured by the gods by chanting, demons rushed upon it and pieced it with evil. So, not demons, it is people. Life. There are those who tend towards dark, those who tend towards light, and those who wander in the middle, in between. Those that says demons pierced it, those are those people, humans, beings, conscious, unconscious, animate, inanimate. They all move towards trying to destroy anything that is of light, so that it can remove the perception of light from people, have them concentrating on physical matter, removing the nature of the divine from within them, or even the existence of it, and move them towards the material, the mind, the science, the ego, as being the only thing that is true, and believing themselves as the only God, and that man's design is superior to all things. This is happening right now in life, right now on this earth plane. This battle is reaching its crescendo. People will be giving an energetic choice through what occurs in this universe in the future that's to come. Well, you have to make a choice between which way your perceptions are going to go. Are they going to become enlightened through knowledge and knowing and seeing truth, even if it's truth that you're not ready to see? Or are we going to delve into the material side of life and wallow within the ego, sciences, transhumanism, and all the aspects that the ego, self-righteous, virtuous self is drivers into ideological belief systems? This is happening today. Okay, and we'll continue on because it's quite a large one. They said to the eye, chant, so be it, said the eye, and chanted for them. This is where the senses come into force, in other words. So I just put this in here. Demons rushed upon it and pierced it with evil. So every part of our senses, those that don't want us to express those senses out into spiritual dimensions or frequencies, rush upon it to close them down. This is what this is talking about. Close our perceptions down, close our sight, close our hearing so we don't hear anything but the ideologies they want us to hear, close our minds so we don't think of anything other than what they want us to think. Close everything about ourselves so that it can be driven towards material, the bodily side of things, which is what the eye, the ear, the mind is talking about when the demons rushed upon it. That evil which consists in thinking what is improper, that is that evil. Likewise, they also affected these other divinities with evil. They pierced them with evil. So that's all other forms around us. All these organs were found to be incapable of chanting the Udgita, which is mantra, as they had contracted evil on account of their attachment to doing well for themselves. So this is talking about seeing well, hearing well, thinking well in the material as perceptive state. They said to the vital breath in the mouth, chant, so be it, said breath, and rushed upon him, pierce him with evil. But as a clod of earth would be scattered by striking against a rock, even so they were scattered in all directions and perished. Gods became, and the demons were crushed. So the chanting, even though the demons came, it's saying those that wish to impose and suppress came, they were ultimately overcome by spiritual light, and then they were scattered. The darkness was scattered all over and fragmented. That divinity, having struck off the evil of these divinities, made this go to where the end of the quarters, east and the west. So they were saying that the darkness spread out in the world, west, east and west. There he set down their evils, all over the world, in other words. One should not go to people of that region. So this is, again, take it as discernment. It's saying, effectively, do not rest in places where evil intention is fermenting, lest he meet there with evil. When that speech was freed from death, it became fire. Death becomes his ignorance, remember. Carried across smell, which is an organ, it became air and blows. Okay, the eye was freed from death, it became sun. Carried across the ear was freed from death, it became the quarters. Carried across mind was freed from death, it became the moon. The breath chanted food for itself, from whatever food is eaten by him alone, sustained by breath. These divinities said, now let us have a share of this food. Then sit around, facing me or enter into me, so be it. They sat around. Whatever food one eats by his breath, they are satisfied by it. He becomes the supporter of his people, their chief, their foremost leader and eater of food and their food. This is not talking about physical food. This is referring to breath. Breath being the force that allows us for spiritual expansion. Food is knowledge. So it's saying let us share this food, which is let us share spiritual knowledge, spiritual enlightenment, spiritual movement together. Death becomes the moon, which is the light above. The sun also becomes freed. It becomes the light, the moon behind, the sun in front. And this is talking about spiritual food, spiritual enlightenment, energy, perception, openness, mind, expansion and of our spiritual journeys. That's what this food is. As this whole sentence is, this whole paragraph is discussing that. Okay, the eulogy of the chant on breath. This is still part of this Upanishad, this chapter, which is the third Brahmana. So the eulogy of the chant on breath. This is also the Samaveda speech, which is verily is the chant. As it is, sa, which means she, and sama, which means he. So it's she, he, sama, veda means she, he. That is why saman, equal calming, is called saman, or because he is equal to these three worlds, to this universe. He who knows the Samaveda to be such attains union with it, or lives in the same world with it. If I had to interpret this is talking about chanting to balance your masculine and feminine energies as one. Saman means equal or calming, it's equalizing. It's also could be regarded as a shaman, but the shaman being a spiritual practitioner. But Saman is equal. This is talking about then once we achieve that, we become equal. Our universe, our energies harmonize with the universe, and we start to become this universe, and we attain a union with all, start to attain union with all that is. This is what this is describing for me. Also the Udgita, this is a hymn, chanting, prayer. By vital breath in this whole world upheld, strong verily is speech. The word verily is used everywhere in this Upanishad so far. I didn't put it everywhere because it literally is in every sentence. And verily means to do something with energy, passion. He knows the wealth of that saman, or equal, he knows the wealth of that equal state, has that wealth. Its wealth indeed is tone. Tone means vibration, frequency, perception, state. Therefore, one who is about to perform the duties of the Rishvi priest desires to have a rich tone in his voice. In other words, he's able to chant with spiritual elevation, spiritual force and power. He who knows the wealth of Saman to be such attains wealth. This also could be shaman in an interpretation of this particular passage. He who knows what is the gold of this Saman obtains gold. The tone verily is its gold. He who thus knows the gold of the Saman obtains gold. So in other words, it's talking about achieving a frequency expansive state of a Saman or shaman, or becoming Saman equal to that which is equal. You attain gold is another expression of something beautiful to rise up to. The repetition only of the purification hymns. Verily the Prastotar priest recites the chant, and while he recites it, let the sacrifice recite these. From darkness lead me to light. Light is immortality. There is nothing here that is hidden. One should secure food by chanting, which is spiritual food. The Udgata priest who knows this, he obtains by chanting. So there's two types of priests, the Prastotar and the Udgata priest. He obtains by chanting. This indeed is called world conquering. In other words, ascending oneself beyond the material world. He who knows, or moksha, in other words, he who thus knows this chant, for him there is no fear of his being without a world. So you can see, very convoluted. It takes a lot of thought to understand what these passages are saying or trying to say. It's not, the Upanisads, like the Gnostic text, particularly Upanisads, is not something you can just read. You almost have to reread these things a couple of times and take time in them. Okay, the fourth Brahmana, the creation of the world from self. In the beginning, this world was only the self in the shape of a person. Looking around, he saw nothing else than the self being the spiritual eye, or the Hiranyagarbha deity archetype. He first said, I am. So we all say, first said, I am is we are, I am the spiritual all, I am divine spirit. Arose the name I, this is I. Before all this, he burnt all evils. So this is talking about to become the spiritual I. You burn and you shed the ego self. It goes to ashes. You burn all evils, in other words. The ideological, the virtuous, the self-righteous self. The one who's expanding of mind from limitation of mind. Seeing where one had not seen. Hearing things, words that one was not hearing. Understanding and contemplating through mind things that one was not initially contemplating. He who knows this burns up him who wishes to be before him. He was afraid. One who is alone is afraid. Alone means of without spirit connection, godlessness, in other words. Then thought to himself, since there is nothing else than myself, of what am I afraid? Fear passed away. It is from a second that fear arises. So yeah, once we attach to ourselves and discover ourselves, there is no fear. It does drop away. From a second fear arising, it can return in an instant. If we allow ourselves to distract ourselves and move away from the path and delve into the material plane again, and allow that to drive us again and move and limit ourselves mentally, emotional, physical, spiritual, etherically, fear will manifest almost immediately. He has no delight, creation. So creation is talking about has no delight. He or who is alone has no delight, of course. He desired a second. So this is talking about physical. Became as large as a woman and a man in close embrace. Self to fall into two parts. From that arose husband and wife. This is talking about male and female form. Therefore the space is filled by a wife. Became united with her. Human beings were produced. So this is talking about procreation, the male and female form. I would say this is more of a spiritual essence rather than how physical male and females were formed. Or the latter becomes united, which becomes sexual unification. It also could mean spiritual wife. Remember in the Nagamari, the feminine was the divine spirit. The Eve was the divine spiritual force coming into Adam. The original being, Atman or self, looks around and sees nothing else but himself. Realizes his loneliness. Feel a desire for companionship, and a fear is dispelled. He realizes nothing else of which he has to be afraid of. Desire for companionship by dividing himself into two parts called husband and wife. So he's talking about the creation of two beings as well, physical, and spiritual. From the union of the two, the race of human beings is produced. She thought, how can he unite with me after having produced me from himself? So this is the female coming from the male, i.e. Eve was supposedly created from a rib of Adam. Similar kind of story. It's all archetypal for me, representing something, representing effectively just that the male and female form exist. Let me hide himself. I became a cow. Other became a bull. So they both became an animal. From that, cows were born. Mares and stallions were born, and all of the forms were born. So what it's saying here is that the male and female human form then became male and female of other animals, procreated, created more animals, then became another form, created that, and then became horses, and every form, every manifestation of form came from this movement. Again, it's archetypal, it's metaphorical, it's mythology. This is just a story that's explaining how other forms came about. Okay. Creation of God's Agni, fire, and Soma, the moon. This is what this passage was about. And so he rubbed back and forth and produced fire from its source. This is he, it being the Hiranyagarbha archetype. He rubbed back and forth and produced fire from its source, the mouth and the hands. All this is his creation indeed, and he himself is all the gods. That he produced from semen, and that is the Soma, moon. Soma is food, and four is the eater of food. This is the highest creation of Brahma, that he created the gods who are superior to him, mortal himself. That bit didn't make any sense to me. He's talking about some mortality, but none of this is mortal. It is all non-corporeal form. So effectively she's saying that Brahma being supreme consciousness, the absolute consciousness, absolute being the divine all Godhead, everything effectively sprung from that. At that time, this universe was undifferentiated. What does that mean? Undifferentiated means there weren't multiple form out there. There was just spiritual force, universal spiritual force, energetic force. And also undifferentiated means that humanity was all spiritual, what came from divine light at the beginning, so was not differentiated, it was all the same. It became differentiated by name, which is creative power. We became differentiated by our creative power, which is free will, and all the creative power of all possibility and probability that allows anything to occur and become. And form, which is visible embodiment, material matter, our form, our bodies, animal bodies, and so forth. He, the self, entered in here, even to the tips of the nails, which is the spirit. Him they see not for as seen, he is incomplete. So they're not seeing the spirit. This is what that's saying. When breathing, he is called the vital force. When speaking, voice. When seeing, the eye. When hearing, the ear. When thinking, the mind. The self is to be meditated upon, for in it all these become one. The self is the foot trace or the mark of all this. So divine spirit is basically the mark of all that is. When you meditate and become spiritual expansive, and we move into the journey, the differentiated eye, hearing, mind, spirit, body become one, and therefore undifferentiated. Okay, the Name Rupa, the name or Nam Rupa, name and shape which together make the individual. The Nama is not the name but the idea. The Nama is the idea, or it could be called the idea of the spiritual idea. Rupa is existential concept, visible embodiment of the idea. So these two elements envelop which is apprehended by the senses, so matter and form. So we have the spirit, and the embodiment of the spirit is the Nama Rupa. Nama is the name, creative power, is the inner power. Rupa is the sensible manifestation of that power. As a whole, as a whole, it's the concrete universe. While the world form is murta, its soul is amurta, is amurta. Forma is corporeal, which is the world form, which is murta, which is corporeal, which is tangible. And amurta, which is the spirit or the soul, which is incorporeal, which is non-tangible, you can't touch it. That part does not leave the senses, which is the incorporeal. Human individual, the space in the heart. The ignorant do not know him who is hidden. Sense or intellectual knowledge which does not involve the functioning of the whole self is incomplete knowledge. Absolutely. Wholeness is integral insight. The self, that self is dearer than a son, is dearer than wealth, and is innermost. A person who speaks of anything else than the self as dear, he will lose what he holds dear, i.e. lose himself. Meditate in the self alone as dear. Dear means holding something of too close to you that is important. Will not perish. they say, since men think that by the knowledge of Brahma they become all that we pray, was it that Brahma knew by which he became all. So this is saying, in other words, to attain knowledge on the spiritual expansion, we become Brahman consciousness, which is absolute consciousness. They become all what is in Brahma, so they basically become what it is that they pray to become, which is Brahman. Okay, Brahman indeed was this in the beginning. It knew itself only as I am Brahman. It became all, became awakened to that. This indeed became that. So it talks about this became that a lot. This what basically it means. It became that. That means it became the divine all, the spiritual self. Same in the case of men. Siya Namadeva knew. I was Manu the sun too. So he's talking about he is all things. He's the moon, he's the sun, he's the planet, celestial bodies, he is all matter, we are all matter. I am Brahman and becomes this all. Even the gods cannot prevent this becoming thus, for he becomes their self. Whoever worships another divinity than this self, he is like an animal to the gods. As many animals serve a man who does each serve the gods. What this basically means is that, as I was saying, there are many stepping stones across the river. We choose which stepping stone we choose to follow. We're not to become subservient to the deities and the archetypes that exist in these scriptures and texts and the embodiments of effigies. These are the gods man has created to understand the divine all. Because of its enormity, it's immutable, it's unknowable. We can never know it through any form and deity or deities that we express fragments of it. That's what archetypes and metaphors are used for. What this is talking about is that until we start understanding ourself, which is that stepping stone I've been mentioning, the journey at the end will be yourself. The deities will be behind you. This is saying that until one stops worshipping and following the gods, the archetypes, the deities, the effigies, one will become a slave to those gods. You have to move on and understand to worship yourself, not this physical ego self, the divine spirit within, and let it elevate and show you the path to grace through yourself. That is what this is saying. The gods are not pleased that men should know the ultimate truth, for they would know the subordinate place the gods hold and give up making them offerings. Absolutely, I cannot stress this enough. This is what I've always been saying from the beginning of this channel, is that those who wish you to focus on the deities who symbolize small aspects of the divine all, small aspects of your own divine spirit, focus you on these things. Religions all do this to a degree. This is why staying in under religious banner will prevent you from moving forward. Take what you need, take what you can understand, absorb, grow, and move on. Even if it means studying every single major philosophy and religion in the world, go ahead and do that. But don't stay on those stones, because this is a subordinate place. The ultimate truth is beyond all of those things. Your divine spirit will guide you to them. Beginning this world was Brahman. The Brahman consciousness is beyond all those things. The absolute consciousness is beyond all these things, all those other stepping stones. Created further an excellent form, the Ksatra power, or Satra power. Who are Satra, which are rulers among the gods? So these are more deities. Indra, Varuna and Soma, which is the moon, Rudra, Pariyana and Yama, Mutru, which is death, Insana, which others, I don't know what all these represent, I didn't look. There is nothing higher than Satra, which is the rulers. These are again archetypal hierarchies, which we can understand, but we move beyond. Brahma is nevertheless the source of Satra, exactly. The supreme consciousness is the source of all these things. In fact, it's not the source of all these things. These things we are their source. Humanity created these deities. It wasn't Brahma Brahmana that created these deities. It wasn't absolute consciousness that created these deities. We manifested these to understand Brahma, to understand absolute consciousness ourselves. He who injures the Brahmana strikes at his own source. Yes. Becomes more evil as he injures one who is superior. That's right. As we suppress our spirit, move to materialness, we injure ourselves. We can never injure the spirit. The spirit is of divine. It can never be destroyed. It never can be put out. It can only be suppressed. It can only be suppressed, and other things can be made to distract it. Perceptual programming, mind programming, ideology, religious practice and dogmatic practice, limitation, lack of expansion, ideological movement, self-grandizing, virtue signaling and virtuous behavior, ego, intellect, worshipping technology, mind, transhumanism, everything that goes on today. These are all things that will suppress the spirit and have you living in this bubble that this world actually is manifestly designed or has been maneuvered. The human experience has been maneuvered so that is what you are surrounded by constantly. And it's on purpose. It's intentional. At the beginning, there was only, remember, if those who are in the shadows of the shadows of the shadows who wish to rule all of earth and rule all humanity, do you think they would want you to have spiritual practice? Do you think they would want you to know your spiritual power? Do they think they would want you to move towards the divine and to know your power and your grace, and that you're able to manifest all things in this world through your creative manifestial power of your divine spirit, immutable, indestructible spirit that can divine and manifest your physical experience, and everything in this universe will change? Do you think they would want that? Absolutely not, because then you would be an independent, sovereign, liberty and freedom and free will would reign free. They would have no power over you. There's no governance over you. There's no dominion over you on this planet. So therefore, everything is done for you to move and suppress you away from that. It's your challenge to become ashes, to become neutral, to become vulnerable, to become open, so that divine can show you the way, drive this knowledge into you. This is what every scripture will tell you. I guarantee it. And I'm going to prove that by going through all the scriptures. Okay, at the beginning there was only one caste or class. There was no caste and there was no class. They were just beginning all as one. I want to say this before we go into the next. And Brahma differentiations were not. Absolutely. There were no differentiations. Caste and class, again, human creations through duality and ego. Control in class hierarchical structure. Nothing was created lesser than the other. We've through our incarnational lives have put ourselves into these castes, put ourselves into these classes, put ourselves into this differentiated states, and allowed them to persist, and thrown ourselves into, because I am only this, I am only that. And this is describing it here. He created the commonality, these classes of gods who are designed in groups, the Vasnas, the Rudras, Adityas, Visvadevas and Maruts. The Brahmana represents knowledge. There is only knowledge, and there is only one divine all. The Kshatriya is a temporal power. They are not enough. We require a class for increasing production and acquiring wealth. He created the Sudra order, or the Pusan, which is the unknowledgeable one, the nourisher. For she nourishes everything that is. Society requires, in addition to wisdom, power and wealth, service and work, wisdom, power, sanctions, distinctions found among gods and men. This is basically talking about, for me, the start of where, as power, wealth and wisdom come into clash, we start to create these manifest dualities of class structure. Now in India, there is the caste structure. There is also underlying class structure, which is derivative, immediate out of class. But class exists everywhere in this planet. Every country has class, either overt, covert, conscious or non-conscious or subconscious. It exists everywhere. Okay, it continues. He created further an excellent form, justice. Power the Satirya class justice. I'm probably not even pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize. A weak man hopes to defeat a strong man by means of justice. That was the intention of the justice system. I can't say it works these days in that way. Even kings are subordinate to dharma, cosmic law, purpose. We cannot avoid the dharma. That is what Krishna was telling Arjuna in the Mahabharata. The purpose of Krishna was to teach Arjuna that, I think it was Arjuna, to fulfill his dharma. His dharma was to fight his brothers. He didn't want to do that, but this was his purpose. This was his cosmic law purpose. So these four, which is actually the primary, one of the major messages of Krishna, was dharma, for us to understand what our purpose is, to come to our purpose. And the purpose is really to fulfill our divine spiritual intention, not necessarily the physical one. So these four orders were created in Brahmana. So there's the Brahmins, which is the higher caste, which is for knowledge, the Kshatriya, which is the authority or the fighter class, the Vaisya, which is the clan and the tribe, and the Sudra, which is not knowledgeable. This exists today, and people are put into these knowingly or unknowingly, just by society alone, and they need. Whilst these things exist, I will promise you, spiritual enlightenment of humanity will not proceed. And the country where these things exist, or classes exist, the expansion that could happen there will be stalled. I absolutely guarantee it. This is not the intention of the divine. This is an imposition of man, and therefore it will constrain man until they go. Until everyone is brought to knowledge. And this means to Brahman. A Brahman as fire, among men as Brahmana. People desire a place among. This is again human tendency. They want to be classed as something, to belong to a group, a clan, a Vaisya. We need to move away from this. We belong to the divine all, and we are divine within ourselves. That is all I am. I don't class myself into any group. I am only a divine expression, and the divine guides my spiritual force in my journey in this life. Nothing and no one else is better or lesser than me. Nobody. I don't class myself better than anyone or lesser than anyone. I will never bow. I will never worship. I will never kiss the feet or the hand of any living thing. And this is what needs to go from here. So we don't need a place. We already have a place. It's our spiritual place. The gods through fire only. Anyone who departs from this world without seeing and knowing his own world, being unknown, does not protect him. Yeah, if you don't become if you become a non-being, this is unknowledgeable. You have to become divine knowledge, which is start to become being, be of being. If one performs a great and holy work, but without knowing that this work of his is exhausted in the end, should meditate only on the self as his true world. Absolutely. Is not exhausted, for out of that very self he creates whatsoever he desires. Absolutely. Once we reconnect with our divine selves, we're on the divine path. Remember I said suffering happens when we deviate from our spiritual path. Once you're on that path, the divine lays it before you. You veer off that, challenges and stones and boulders are thrown into the river of your life, and what was tranquil waters become turbulent ones. The further and further they move away, this is the essence of unintended suffering. Okay, now this self, verily, there's that word again, is the world of all things. Insofar as he makes offerings and sacrifice, he becomes the world of gods. We don't need sacrifice. So sacrifice just can be, in the modern nature of things, can be an inherent one, an implied one that just occurs to you. As you move into your spiritual journey, I will guarantee you your attraction to material things will drop. Your attraction to the lustful desires of the world in all of its forms will start to recede. These are the sacrifices you'll naturally make. You could make sacrifices to in life to meditate every day. You can make sacrifices to be gratitude in the morning and pray at night. You could give gratitude and sacrifices to give more to others of yourself and your time. It doesn't have to be sacrificing a living thing. Okay. Where was I? Okay. He learns the Vedas. He becomes the world of seers. Becomes the world of the fathers. One wishes non-injury for his own world, so all beings wish non-injury for him who has this knowledge. The interdependence of man and the world, including deities, seers, fathers, animals, is brought out. We're all one. The same idea is elaborated in the theory of the 5 great sacrifices, of which, I do not know what they are. It doesn't say that in this chapter. It may do in other chapters, we will have to wait and see. In the beginning, this world was just the self, one only. He desired would that I have a wife. This is again talking about the previous thing. I'll read it anyway. I may have offspring. I would perform rites. A man who is single desires would that I had a wife. So he practices rites and sacrifices, and so he can have a wife, and therefore he have offspring. I would perform rites. The ignorant man thinks he is incomplete without wife, children, and possessions. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with those things, by the way, but to think that those material things create you and complete you is not actually the case. Now, creating rites and practices and rituals, many already do this. I know someone personally in my own family who did this, went to India because they were unable to conceive, and did practices. I know others for other reasons did practices, and then those particular rituals they did. That doesn't mean sacrifices of animals, by the way. It could be just helping the poor, giving to a church, feeding, whatever it could be. Doing something of grace is a rite. Doing something of grace is a ritual as well. They came and had the fruits of those things materialized in their lives. So this does occur. It's energy, remember. When you do something, you're projecting intention and energy. But to keep doing it, don't just do it because you want something. Remember, become that what it is that you seek. Become these things. This is the message I give always. Otherwise, it's just a practice. To become truly a divine being, you're going to have to become a divine being, which means you have to be it, not just practice these things. I say this with the utmost vehement energy because it's true. It cannot be avoided. I'm sorry if that offends anybody. Okay, the 5th Brahmana, Prajapati, which is the creative force, production of the world as food for himself. Father of creation, which is Hiranyagarbha, or could be the absolute, I'll just interpret it as Hiranyagarbha, produced by knowledge and austerity 7 kinds of food, 1 common to all, so one thing all things are, 2 assigned to the gods, 3 made for himself, 1 he gave to the animals. In it everything rests. Why then do they not decline when they are being eaten all the time? He who knows imperishableness eats food. He does not. He does to the gods. He lives on the strength. This is basically talking about divine essence in things, not necessarily actual physical food. This is divinity, spiritual essence to all things, animals, other gods, Hiranyagarbha, I forget the other one. There's another one above. The universal force and the creative force, which is Hiranyagarbha. Then above all, both those are the absolute consciousness and the absolute itself. That's what this is discussing. Father produced knowledge and austerity, 7 kinds of food. Again, this is a repeat. He who worship eats that common food is not freed from evil, for that food is mixed. Common food, which is that which is everyone has, indifferent. 2 he assigns to God, 1 sacrifices, and the offers to God produces work by his continuous meditation. This is the only bit that is really worth it. Work by his continuous meditation. The pratika, image symbol, is the mouth. So it's continuous meditation is what I would take from this passage. There's a lot of repetition, by the way, in the Upanisads. The Sanskrit translations do repeat themselves many, many times, which is a little bit frustrating because it's a massive text, and when you read it, you see repeating, but you read them because there's elements and sentences in each passage which has meaning, but the rest of it is just repetition from before. It takes effort to pull those things out. The three worlds and the mean of winning them. There are three worlds: the worlds of men, of fathers, of gods. Worlds of men is to be obtained through the Son alone, fathers by the works and rites, gods by the knowledge. They praise knowledge. So what does this mean? Remember in the Vedas they were talking about you become a son. The world of men is obtained through the Son. So we learn from our fathers, we learn from the elders. The fathers works by rites, ritual and practice, and also teaching the Son. And from that we move to what's called true knowledge, ascension knowledge, transcendental knowledge, which is how we achieve the movement towards the absolute, or in God's, as in this is referring to. Okay, Father's benediction and the transmission of charge. When a man thinks that he is about to depart, says to his son, "You are Brahman, son who is instructed," so teaching his son, "world procuring, and departs from this world. As is this divinity, so do all beings regard him who knows him. Whatever sufferings creatures may undergo, these remain with them, but only merit goes to him. No evil goes to the gods." Okay, I'm going to explain this in my interpretation for you. So what this basically means is whatever suffering, I want to go to the end of this. Whatever sufferings creatures may undergo, these remain with them, but only merit goes to him. No evil goes to the gods. This is just yourself. Whether you have positive or negative action, it all stays with you. My actions, words, thoughts and intentions are all mine. This is in your Akasha. This is your Akashic record, holds everything that you have ever been, ever will be, all possibility, probability in your life, all free will, all that will be, has been, never will be, and is today. It exists in your personal record. This is, you hold all the suffering, you hold all the merit, you hold all the non-merit. It all transcends into the absolute, because we are absolute is experience itself through us, but it doesn't hold our karma. We hold our own karma, we hold our own Akasha. And the Akasha resides only in this universal plane. Beyond it, the absolute, there is no beyond because everything is in the absolute, but let's just speak metaphorically like that because our minds can correlate separation that way. Segmentation, compartmentalization of things. So this is really talking about, yes, merit goes to him. Merit means good-natured action, a positive spiritual transcendental movement moves us towards him being absolute. Evil keeps us here. Everything but attaches and remains with us, the creatures, in other words. So this is what this really actually is saying to us. Individuals suffer because one causes suffering to another, but in the universal spirit where all individuals are one, the suffering of the individuals do not affect the whole. Well, they do affect the whole in the material sense here. Our energy can either be negative, positive. If it's negative, it transcends out like a stone cascading itself in the infinite pond or lake or the sea. It'll cascade a waveform out. That waveform merges with all of the others. And if everyone's negative, this world will be a horrific, demonic place to be. But as there is more love in this world than there is bad nature, we experience more love than we experience bad nature. So it is, in a material sense, it is. Does it affect the whole in terms of our universal spirit when we're not in form? No, because we are in universal spirit. Physical things do not affect us there. We're in infinite form, infinite state. But all things, when we come down here, we pass our Akasha, and again, it does affect the whole, and it affects our experience as well. The unfailing breath. Again, remember, breath is central to Vedic, yogic, Hindu practices, meditative practices. The power in which the force of energy is cascaded around us. Prajapati produced the active senses. Speech resolved, I will go on speaking. I will go on seeing. Ear, I will go on hearing. Death, having become weariness, laid hold of them, held them back for their work. Speech becomes weary. They, the sense, sought to know him. Let us all assume his form. This is what I was speaking to before. The breath will ignite your senses, i.e. the power of the spirit through the action of force, energy and breath. The world is created to suppress your speaking, suppress your death is ignorance. It holds them. Ignorance will hold and suppress them. But they become weary, but the senses do wish to know more. There is the spirit pushing up constantly from within you, always trying to rise to the surface. Always. It never ceases to do this. And you'll either sense it or not, depending on how much one has suppressed it. The unfailing air. Sun rises in whom it sets. In truth, from breath. He should breathe in and breathe out, wishing he wins complete union with that divinity and residence in the same world with him. In other words, breathe in, breathe out, attain knowledge within, from without, constantly, and to achieve that union to that which we seek. It's always talking about breath. Breath is really talking about, remember, it's always saying you have to contemplate, which is the third state of life, remember? There is the hearing, there is the reflecting, and then there's the meditating. And so this is when you meditate and reflect, it's breath. You sit silent and you breathe. To meditate and to be silent and to be one and to be present, it always talks about relaxing the breath, concentrating on the breath. The breath is the way that we ignite our senses, our kundalini, our chakra, our meditative practice to silence ourselves so our mind can detach from the body and expand outward into the all during our meditative practice. And that's how a transcendental experience achieves itself and then sustains itself through our waking state as we experience world around us. Okay, the sixth and final Brahmana, which is coming up. I know this was going to be a long video, so guys, watch this in parts if you want. I know this is the very end, so it's hardly any point, because if you've watched this by now, you've basically finished it. Sixth Brahmana, threefold character of the world. This world is a triad of name, which is creative power, shape, which is visible embodiment, and works, which is our actions, words, thoughts, and intentions. It is there, Brahman, for it sustains all names, which is creative power. Of shapes, which is the visible embodiment. Shapes, I, is the source. I, we see the physical embodiment. The body is the source, for from it all works arise. It is there, Brahman, for it sustains all works. These three together are one, this self. The self through one is this triad. This is the immortal veiled by the real. The breath is the immortal name, and shape are real. So it's talking about breath constantly, because it's saying it's the passage towards revealing to yourself the name, which is the definition of creative power in the Upanisads, and shape, which is the visible embodiment of that creative power, and works is driving that into the world through your actions, words, thoughts, and intentions. So we'll come to the end of that. That first chapter is very long. Trust me, the other chapters are equally as long. So all my videos are going to be long videos. I'm not going to break chapters up into two. I'm just going to go for each chapter one video at a time and get through this. It's the easiest way to do it, and it's also then collapses it together for everyone. Second coming is you. Become, and do not just practice it just because you want something in that moment. It will be temporary. And again, this book, which goes in Amazon, if you wish to look at that, talks about some of the foundational stuff I talk about here. There will be other books, I'm sure, coming up. I write them when I'm spiritually guided to, when I have inspiration to do so. And spiritual333@gmail.com if you want to ask me anything or want me to concentrate on anything or do anything in the future. And again, of course, available on all these social media platforms. Rumble is one I haven't yet uploaded to yet. One video's on there, a good one, by the way, which you might be interested in. It's on these channels as well. But again, I want to say thank you to everyone. I just put the webcam back on there. I want to say thank you to everyone for listening to this very long video. We'll be going for 1 hour 26 now. I very much appreciate it. I apologize for the length of the video, but they're all going to be this long in the Upanisads journey. The next chapter is coming up soon. I need to read it myself and extract what is useful so that I can be useful to you. And I appreciate your time and say God bless to you all. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and